The cleaner had always walked into the building quietly, carrying his mop and bucket without much notice. People hardly looked his way when he passed through the wide doors. The building was filled with light, music, and laughter most evenings, but for him it was simply a place of work. While guests in shiny clothes walked past him, he blended into the background, almost invisible. No one really asked his name. No one really cared to know much about him. For them, he was the one who cleaned up after others, the one who was told, "Just clean the floors." He didn't complain. He never argued or showed anger. He nodded politely and kept doing his work, sweeping and mopping the glossy marble floors that reflected the chandeliers hanging from above. It was a beautiful place, a hall where wealthy people came to eat, drink, and enjoy the music. The cleaner often found himself pausing for a moment when someone played the piano. The sound carried across the room in such a way that even while scrubbing stubborn stains, his ears followed the notes. It felt like the piano was telling a story only he could understand. But he never let anyone see that side of him. To everyone else, he was simply the quiet worker who kept the place tidy. The waiters often hurried past him, some of them speaking to him as if he wasn't fully there. "Be careful not to leave streaks on the floor," they would say in a tone that felt more like a command than advice. The manager sometimes waved his hand dismissively if the cleaner paused near the piano for too long. "Don't get distracted. Just clean the floors," and so he obeyed. He lowered his head, pushed his mop, and carried on. Yet inside him, there was a part of his soul that longed for something else. He had a secret, a memory. He hadn't always been just a cleaner. Once, long ago, music had been his world. There had been times in his younger years when he spent hours sitting at an old upright piano in his childhood home. His fingers learned the keys like a second language, finding comfort in melodies that carried him away from all his worries. But life had a way of pulling dreams away when responsibility called. His family needed help, bills had to be paid, and work became the priority. Slowly, the piano became a luxury he could no longer afford to keep in his life. He stopped playing, and time carried him into years of working jobs that never cared about what he could do beyond his duties. Still, the music never left him. When he pushed his mop across the restaurant floor at night, sometimes he tapped his fingers lightly on the handle, pretending he was playing invisible keys. When the piano in the corner was silent, he could almost hear it in his mind, whispering melodies he once knew. He kept this private world hidden because who would believe the cleaner could ever play? People had already made up their minds about him. One evening, as the restaurant filled with laughter and the smell of roasted food, the cleaner walked quietly across the room. He worked while a young pianist played at the grand piano. Guests clapped, glasses clinked, and the music added to the richness of the atmosphere. The cleaner moved his mop slowly, glancing now and then at the pianist's hands. Something in his chest stirred, an ache he hadn't felt in years. He wanted so badly to sit there, to touch the keys again, to let the music flow through him. But he shook his head and reminded himself that was not his place anymore. As the performance ended, guests applauded, and the cleaner bent down to pick up a piece of paper that had fallen near the stage. Just then, one of the waiters smirked at him. "Don't get any ideas," the waiter whispered with a laugh. "That piano isn't for you. Just clean the floors." The words cut deeper than the waiter realized. It wasn't cruelty in his voice, just the casual way people dismissed the cleaner, assuming he had no dreams beyond his mop. The cleaner gave a small nod and went back to his work, but inside a storm brewed. When the night was over and the last guest left, the hall grew quiet. The piano stood in the corner, shining under the dimmed lights. The cleaner stood alone with his mop and bucket. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. His hands trembled slightly as he walked closer to the piano. He didn't sit, didn't even touch it. He only looked at the keys, remembering what it felt like long ago. After a moment, he sighed deeply, turned away, and went back to finish cleaning. He never allowed himself to touch it, afraid that if he did, all the memories would come rushing back too painfully. This became his routine. Night after night, he worked quietly while music played for others. He was always nearby, always listening. Sometimes when the pianist played something familiar, the cleaner closed his eyes for just a second, hiding behind his mop, letting the sound carry him into his own world. Then he opened his eyes quickly, making sure no one saw. He had learned to live with being unseen. People looked past him as if he were part of the furniture. Yet there was a quiet strength in him, a patience that came from years of being underestimated. He never tried to prove anyone wrong. He simply endured. But inside, he carried the weight of a truth that no one in that building knew. The man who was told only to clean floors had music flowing in his veins. One rainy night, as he arrived early for his shift, the sound of the piano reached him before he even stepped inside. Someone was practicing. The cleaner paused at the door, listening before slipping in quietly. He kept his eyes on the ground as he walked past, not wanting to draw attention. The pianist was too focused on his notes to notice him anyway. As the cleaner worked, he hummed softly under his breath, just enough for himself to hear. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Later, while he cleaned near the piano, he felt the weight of the instrument's presence again. He couldn't help but glance at it. The pianist had left and the piano sat silent. Its lid was open, the keys gleaming under the lights. The cleaner's fingers itched with longing. He whispered to himself, just one note. Just one. But he stopped. He shook his head firmly and forced himself back to his mop. He couldn't risk it. If anyone saw, he would surely be laughed at. Maybe even lose his job. And so he stayed in his place, living between the world of silence and the world of music that existed only in his mind. People thought they knew him. To them, he was the man who moved quietly across the floor, carrying a mop, staying out of the way. They didn't know the hours he once spent practicing scales until his fingers ached. They didn't know how he once dreamed of performing in halls much like the one he now cleaned. They didn't know how his heart still beat in rhythm with music even when he carried buckets of dirty water. He had accepted this life, or at least tried to. But deep inside there was something that would not go away. The piano was always there, watching him, waiting in the corner. Every night he looked at it one last time before leaving. And every night he told himself the same thing. Just clean the floors. What he didn't know was that soon, everything was about to change. The grand piano stood in the corner of the hall like a proud king, polished so often that it glowed under the lights. Every guest who walked in noticed it. Every waiter passed by it, and every evening it was played by musicians who were hired to fill the room with songs. But for the cleaner, it was something more than just an instrument. It was a memory, a dream, and a quiet pain that lived inside him every day he came to work. When he swept the floor around it, he moved slower, almost careful not to disturb the air near it. He never let his fingers touch the keys, but his eyes lingered. Sometimes when no one was looking, he leaned on the mop handle and imagined what it would sound like if he could sit there again. The other workers sometimes noticed his gaze and laughed. "What are you staring at that thing for?" one of the waiters teased one afternoon. "You're not planning on playing, are you? Just clean the floors. Leave the piano to people who actually know what they're doing." The cleaner only smiled weakly and carried on. He had heard those words so many times now that they no longer surprised him. People thought they were joking, but their laughter always carried a sharp edge. Nobody imagined he could do anything more than scrub and mop. He didn't argue. He had learned long ago that silence was easier. Yet every word pressed deeper into his heart, reminding him of what he once had and what he had lost. There were evenings when the piano was played so beautifully that even the guests put down their forks to listen. Some performers were confident, striking every note with pride, while others played softly, filling the hall with gentle melodies. And on nights like those, the cleaner felt both joy and sadness. Joy because music still lived around him. Sadness because he was always on the outside of it, watching from the shadows, pushing his mop as if that was all he was made for. One late evening, long after the guest had gone and the staff was clearing up, the manager noticed the cleaner standing near the piano. His eyes were locked on the keys, his face calm but far away, as though he was listening to a sound no one else could hear. "What are you doing?" the manager asked sharply. The cleaner startled, quickly shaking his head. "Nothing. Just cleaning." The manager narrowed his eyes. "Don't touch it. That piano costs more than you'll ever make here. Do your job and keep moving." The cleaner nodded quickly and walked away, gripping the mop tighter. The words stung, but he swallowed the pain and continued his duties. It became clear to him that he would never be seen as anything more than the man with the mop. But still the piano stayed in his thoughts. He couldn't erase it. One afternoon, while preparing the hall for an event, he overheard two waiters talking. "The pianist tonight is supposed to be amazing," one of them said. "He trained in Europe. Can you imagine the kind of life that is? Traveling, performing, getting paid just to play?" The other waiter laughed. "Must be nice." Some people are born for that, others are born to mop it all up afterward. Their eyes drifted toward the cleaner who was polishing a table in the corner. They didn't say his name, but they didn't need to. The message was clear. He was the one meant to mop up after others. That was his role in their eyes. The cleaner kept his face calm, but inside he felt the weight of their words. They were not cruel people, not really. They were just repeating what everyone believed, that he was invisible, replaceable, someone who belonged only to the background. But the piano in the corner kept calling to him. Each night when the music ended, he cleaned around it like a guardian, treating it with a respect no one noticed. To him it was more than wood and strings. It was life. It was the voice he had buried years ago. He remembered the first piano he had ever touched. It had been old, chipped and missing 2 keys, but to him it was magical. He used to spend hours practicing, teaching himself songs by ear. His family had little, but they had each other, and music had been the one gift he could carry into every room. He remembered playing for neighbors, for friends, even for strangers who stopped to listen. But time had changed everything. Work became more important than music. Bills, responsibilities, and struggles forced him to step away from the piano. 1 year turned into another, and soon it had been many years since his hands touched the keys. Still, the melodies lived in his memory. They whispered to him when the hall was quiet, reminding him of what could have been. It wasn't only the instrument he longed for. It was the feeling of being heard, of being seen not as a cleaner but as a human being with something to share. But whenever he thought about it too long, he reminded himself of the voices around him. Just clean the floors. One particularly busy evening, the hall was packed with guests. The piano was being played by a confident young man who entertained the crowd with fast, dazzling notes. The cleaner moved through the tables quietly, wiping spills, collecting glasses, staying invisible. As the night went on, the pianist took a break, leaving the piano empty. The cleaner's heart pounded as he walked past it, so close he could almost feel the keys beneath his fingers. He slowed his steps, his body almost leaning toward it. But before he could stop himself, one of the waiters snapped, "Don't even think about it. That's not for you." The cleaner froze, embarrassed. He forced a smile, shook his head, and kept walking. The laughter that followed him wasn't loud, but it was enough to echo in his mind for the rest of the night. After everyone had gone and the building was quiet again, he stayed behind longer than usual. He stood near the piano, staring at it in the silence. His hand hovered above the keys, trembling. For a moment, he thought about pressing down just one note, letting the sound break the silence. But fear stopped him. What if someone walked in? What if he was caught? What if he lost this job, the only stable thing in his life? So he lowered his hand and walked away, telling himself once again, just clean the floors. But inside, something was beginning to change. The music was no longer content to stay hidden in his heart. It pressed against him harder every day, asking to be let out. He didn't know it yet, but the time was coming when he wouldn't be able to hold it back any longer. The evening began like many others. The restaurant was glowing with golden lights. The smell of food filled the air, and guests in elegant clothes filled the tables. Laughter and conversation echoed across the hall, and the piano in the corner stood ready for the night's performance. The cleaner, as always, moved quietly with his mop and cloth, blending into the background as people passed by without noticing. But tonight, something unusual was happening. The piano bench was empty. The young pianist who usually played had not arrived. The minutes stretched on, and guests began to shift in their seats. Some tapped their fingers on the table. Others whispered to each other, wondering why the music had not yet begun. The manager looked worried. He checked his watch again and again, pacing near the entrance. The piano was a centerpiece of the restaurant. Without its music, the room felt strangely incomplete. The clinking of glasses and the chatter of guests seemed too sharp, too loud. Something was missing. The cleaner noticed the tension as he wiped down a nearby table. He could hear the impatience in the guests' voices, and though it had nothing to do with him, his heart raced. The piano sat there, silent and waiting, almost calling his name. He quickly looked away, forcing himself to focus on the cloth in his hands. After some time, a group of guests at one of the larger tables started joking. "Maybe the cleaner should play for us," one of them said loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Laughter followed, and another guest added, "Yes, let's see what he can do. He spends all night staring at it anyway." The cleaner froze where he stood. His cheeks burned, but he pretended not to hear, keeping his head down as he polished the table. The laughter continued for a moment before dying out into more whispers and restless murmurs. The manager, clearly embarrassed by the situation, sighed and rubbed his forehead. He walked quickly to the table of guests, trying to calm them. "I apologize," he said, forcing a smile. "Our pianist has been delayed. He should be here any moment now." But the guests weren't satisfied. "We came here for an evening with music," one of them said, frustration in his tone. "Silence doesn't suit a place like this." The manager nodded nervously, looking around as if searching for an answer. His eyes landed on the cleaner. For a moment he stared as if remembering the guest's earlier joke. He hesitated, but desperation pushed him forward. "You," the manager said suddenly, pointing to the cleaner. "Come here." The cleaner looked up in surprise, pointing at himself in confusion. "Me? Yes, you. Come here." The cleaner walked slowly toward the piano, his heart thudding in his chest. He didn't understand what the manager wanted from him. Surely he couldn't mean. The manager leaned closer and whispered, "Can you play anything? Anything at all? Just to calm the guests until the pianist arrives." The cleaner's mouth went dry. He wanted to answer, but his voice caught in his throat. He could feel every eye in the room on him now, watching, waiting. I shouldn't," he whispered back. "It's not my place." The manager's eyes grew sharper. "It is tonight. Sit, play something. If you make a fool of yourself, it's on me." "Just do it." The cleaner felt dizzy. For years he had been told to stay away from the piano, to focus only on his mop and bucket. And now suddenly he was being asked to sit at it in front of everyone. He looked around at the guests. Some were smirking, expecting him to embarrass himself. Others looked curious, tilting their heads as though they wanted to see what would happen. Slowly, almost unwillingly, the cleaner lowered himself onto the piano bench. His hands rested in his lap, trembling. He stared at the black and white keys in front of him. They looked both familiar and foreign, like an old friend he hadn't seen in years. The room grew quiet. The laughter faded. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Everyone waited. The cleaner took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. He thought of all the nights he had stood near this piano, longing to touch it. He thought of the years he had hidden his music, letting it live only in his mind, and then slowly he lifted his hands and placed his fingers on the keys. At first he hesitated, pressing just one soft note. The sound rang out, filling the silence. His chest tightened, but something inside him urged him forward. His fingers moved again, this time forming a simple chord, then another. And before he realized it, the music began to flow. The notes rose gently at first, uncertain, like a whisper. But soon his hands remembered what his heart had never forgotten. The melody grew stronger, clearer, carrying a warmth that filled the hall. Each note seemed to tell a story, one that spoke of quiet struggles, hidden dreams, and unspoken pain. The guests leaned forward in their seats, their earlier laughter forgotten. The smirks disappeared from their faces. A hush spread across the room as the cleaner continued to play. His body relaxed, and for the first time in years he felt whole again. He wasn't just the man with the mop anymore. He was a musician, a storyteller, letting the piano speak the words he had kept locked away for so long. Some guests exchanged glances, surprised. Others closed their eyes, swaying slightly to the melody. The manager, who had been standing nervously near the door, now stared in disbelief. This wasn't just someone pressing random keys. This was real music. Beautiful music. As the piece grew, the cleaner forgot about the audience. He forgot about the waiters who had laughed, the guests who had mocked, even the manager who had doubted him. In that moment, there was only the piano and the music flowing through him. His fingers danced over the keys, faster now, stronger, until the sound filled every corner of the hall. And then, as suddenly as it began, the song softened. His hands slowed, the notes falling like raindrops, gentle and calm. Finally, he pressed the last key, letting the sound linger in the air before fading into silence. For a moment, the room stayed completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had paused. Then slowly at first, the applause began. One guest clapped, then another, and soon the entire room erupted in cheers. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some even whistling. The cleaner sat frozen, his hands still resting on the keys. His heart pounded as he looked out at the crowd. He had never expected this. He had thought they would laugh, that they would dismiss him again. But instead, their faces were filled with awe, their voices lifted in applause meant for him. The manager hurried forward, his mouth open in disbelief. Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The cleaner only gave a small smile, his eyes shining with quiet pride. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The music had already spoken for him. From that night on, things would never be the same. The applause didn't stop. It filled the hall, bouncing off the walls and chandeliers, yet the cleaner remained seated at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys. For a moment he couldn't believe what had just happened. The music he had hidden for so many years had come alive in front of all these people, and instead of mocking him, they were cheering. Their admiration was overwhelming, almost frightening. Slowly he let his fingers lift from the keys, feeling the cool wood beneath his hands. The sound of clapping continued, but his mind was a whirlwind. He had played countless melodies in his mind, replayed pieces from his childhood, and imagined standing in front of an audience. But nothing compared to this. Nothing had prepared him for the sight of strangers looking at him with awe instead of dismissal. The guests, who only minutes before had been restless and impatient, now whispered among themselves, their voices filled with wonder. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked, eyes wide. "I can't believe it. That was incredible." Another shook his head. "I've been to so many performances, but nothing like this. Who knew he could play like that?" Even the staff, who had often laughed at him earlier, couldn't hide their surprise. They had walked past him for years without a second thought, assuming he was just a man with a mop and bucket. But now, as they watched him at the piano, their perception shattered. The quiet cleaner, the one who had always been invisible, had captivated them all with his music. The manager, still standing near the doorway, wiped sweat from his brow. He had doubted this man, as everyone else had. But now, seeing the expressions on the guests' faces, he felt a mix of guilt and amazement. I never expected that," he whispered under his breath. The cleaner's eyes scanned the room. He saw guests leaning forward in their chairs, some with tears glistening in their eyes. There was a mother who clutched her child's hand tightly, moved by the gentle flow of the melody. An elderly couple held each other's hands, nodding along with the rhythm. Even the chef, standing near the kitchen doorway, looked astonished, a broad smile spreading across his face. It was then that the cleaner realized something important. Music wasn't just about talent or training. It was about connection. Every note he had played had reached someone's heart. For the first time in years, he felt seen, truly seen. And it wasn't just because of applause or recognition. It was because his music had spoken the words he could never say, shared the emotions he had kept hidden. He closed his eyes and began to play again, almost instinctively. This time it wasn't a rehearsed piece or a melody he had practiced. It was spontaneous, flowing from deep within him. His fingers danced over the keys with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. The hall seemed to breathe with him, every note creating a bridge between his soul and the people in the room. The guests listened in silence, captivated by the emotion in each chord. They had never expected such beauty from the man who had been ignored for so long. Some leaned back in their chairs, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, eyes fixed on the piano, as if they were witnessing a miracle. As he played, memories of his childhood flooded back. He remembered sitting at his first piano, learning by ear, feeling the joy of creating something that spoke louder than words. He remembered the nights when he had dreamed of performing for an audience, only to have life pull him in another direction. And now, here he was, finally able to share the gift he had carried quietly for so many years. A few moments into the performance, the laughter and mockery from earlier that night seemed like a distant memory. The staff who had once doubted him now watched with admiration, some even exchanging glances of disbelief. The waiters who had teased him before now whispered among themselves, saying things like, "I can't believe he's doing this," and "He's amazing." The cleaner didn't notice them. He was lost in the music, in the story he was telling through the piano. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful. He played with a depth of emotion that came from years of longing, frustration, and hope. The hall had become a sanctuary, a place where the barriers of class, status, and expectation no longer mattered. Here there was only the music and the hearts it touched. As the piece reached its climax, the cleaner's fingers moved faster, yet with precision and grace. The notes soared and fell, weaving a tapestry of sound that wrapped around everyone in the room. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the music take them to a place they had never been. Others looked at the cleaner with tears in their eyes, realizing that this man, whom they had ignored for years, held a talent far beyond what they had imagined. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the music softened. The notes became gentle, tender, and lingering. The cleaner's hands hovered over the keys for a moment, letting the final sound resonate through the hall. When he finally lifted them, there was silence. A silence so profound that it felt sacred. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The guests sat in stunned awe, processing what they had just witnessed. Then slowly the applause began. It started with a single clap, hesitant and quiet, but it quickly grew, filling the room with a thunderous roar. People rose to their feet, cheering, whistling, and clapping. Some guests even called out words of praise, their voices breaking through the noise of the hall. The manager rushed forward, a mixture of shock and pride on his face. I can't believe it," he said. "That was incredible. Absolutely incredible." The cleaner finally allowed himself a small smile. He felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of accomplishment and recognition that he had never experienced before. For so many years he had been invisible, dismissed, and underestimated. But now, in this moment, he knew that his talent, his passion, and his heart had been seen and appreciated. Guests approached him, some with tears in their eyes, thanking him for the music. "That was beautiful," one said. "I've never heard anything like it." Another added, "You have a gift. Please don't ever hide it again." The staff who had once doubted him now crowded around, offering congratulations and words of awe. The chef, wiping his hands on his apron, said simply, "You're amazing. I can't believe we didn't know." Through it all, the cleaner remained humble. He thanked them softly, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. He didn't boast or demand attention. He simply nodded, letting the music speak for him. As the applause finally began to fade, the cleaner looked around the hall, taking in the faces of the guests and staff who had witnessed his performance. He realized that tonight had changed everything. The world that had once seen him as just a cleaner had been transformed. For the first time, they saw him for who he truly was, a musician, a storyteller, and a human being with a gift to share. And in that realization, the cleaner felt a peace he had not known in years. The piano in the corner, which had once been a silent reminder of dreams postponed, had now become a bridge between his past and his present, between his hidden talent and the world that had finally recognized it. He understood something essential that night. It wasn't the applause that mattered most. It was the connection. Every note he played had reached someone's heart, and that was more powerful than any recognition or praise. For the first time, he felt that his life had meaning beyond the floors he cleaned and the tasks he completed each day. The hall eventually quieted, and the guests returned to their meals, still murmuring in awe about the unexpected performance. The manager, now smiling with genuine admiration, approached the cleaner once more. "You have something special," he said quietly. "Don't ever forget that." The cleaner nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He had been told for so long to just clean the floors, to stay in the shadows, to hide his talent. But tonight had proven that talent could not be hidden forever. When the right moment came, it demanded to be seen, heard, and felt. As he packed up his cleaning supplies and prepared to leave for the night, the cleaner cast one last look at the piano. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, and for a brief moment it felt like a friend silently acknowledging him. He smiled softly, feeling a sense of gratitude and quiet triumph. Tonight had been more than a performance. It had been a revelation, not just for the guests, the staff, or the manager, but for the cleaner himself. He had rediscovered a part of who he was, and in doing so, he had shown the world that people were more than the roles they were assigned. Dreams, talent, and passion could exist in anyone, no matter how humble their position or how invisible they seemed. And as he walked out into the night, leaving the warm glow of the hall behind, he felt a newfound confidence. The piano in the corner had once been a silent witness to his hidden talent, but now it was a reminder that sometimes the world has a way of revealing itself when we least expect it. The night air was cool as the cleaner stepped out of the restaurant. The streets were quiet, the city lights reflecting softly on the wet pavement from the afternoon rain. His mop and bucket had been stored away, the hall now empty and calm after the excitement of the evening. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time, Hope. All week he had worked quietly, unnoticed, blending into the background. No one paid attention to him, and he had come to accept that. But tonight something had shifted. The music he had released into the hall had changed the way people saw him, and deep down he knew it had changed the way he saw himself. The next morning, he arrived early for his shift, still carrying the memory of last night's performance. The piano sat in the corner, its polished surface gleaming under the soft lights. He paused for a moment, brushing his hands across it lightly, not to play, but almost as if to say hello to an old friend. The manager was already there, walking toward him with a smile that was both awkward and warm. "You did something extraordinary last night," the manager said. "I don't think anyone expected it, including me. You need to know that your talent. It's remarkable." The cleaner nodded quietly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you," he said softly. He didn't want to boast. He had learned humility from years of being overlooked, but the recognition, even in small words, felt good. The staff gathered around as the story of the performance spread quickly. Waiters, cooks, and other employees approached him, offering congratulations and expressing awe at his ability. Some confessed that they had doubted him before, assuming he could only clean floors. Others admitted they had secretly admired his quiet dignity and dedication, unaware of the depth of his skill. For the first time, he realized that people were seeing him as more than just a cleaner. They were beginning to understand that his quiet exterior hid a world of talent, experience, and heart. It was a subtle shift, but one that filled him with pride. Days passed, and the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed. Guests who had witnessed his performance told others about it, sharing the story of the cleaner who played the piano so beautifully that it left the entire hall speechless. The restaurant received more reservations, not just for the food, but for the chance to experience the music of the man who had once been invisible. The manager, now fully aware of the cleaner's talent, approached him with a proposal. "I want you to play more often," he said. "Not just when there's a problem. The guests love it, and honestly, we need someone like you here." The cleaner hesitated. He had spent so many years hiding, so many years believing that music was no longer a part of his life. But something in the manager's eyes and in the memory of the applause convinced him. Slowly he nodded. "I will," he said, and so it began. The cleaner's shifts now included moments at the piano. Sometimes he played before the guests arrived, filling the room with soft melodies as the staff prepared for the evening. Other times he played during dinner, weaving music through the clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation. Each note carried a piece of his soul, and each performance reminded him that he had reclaimed something that had been missing for far too long. As he played, he noticed the small changes around him. Guests smiled more genuinely, lingering at the tables to listen. Staff approached him with new respect, no longer dismissing him as invisible. Even the manager relied on him, knowing that his presence and music brought a unique warmth to the restaurant. But beyond recognition and respect, the cleaner discovered something even more important: a sense of purpose. Music had always been a private world for him, a secret refuge. Now sharing it with others gave him a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever experienced. Each evening, as his fingers danced across the keys, he felt connected not just to the instrument, but to the people who listened, to the stories they carried, and to the life he had reclaimed. One evening, a little girl came in with her mother. She was shy, hiding behind her mother's arm, but her eyes lit up when she saw the piano. The cleaner noticed her fascination and smiled softly. He began to play a gentle, familiar melody, one that was soothing and tender. The girl's eyes widened and she moved a little closer, mesmerized by the sound. By the end of the piece, she clapped softly, a shy smile spreading across her face. Watching her, the cleaner realized that music was not just about talent or recognition. It was about connection. It could reach across generations, touch hearts, and create moments that people would carry with them long after they left. The thought warmed him in a way that made all the years of struggle feel worthwhile. Over time, the story of the cleaner who could play the piano spread far beyond the restaurant. People began to speak of him as a symbol of hidden talent and perseverance. Some came specifically to hear him play, curious to witness the man who had once been told to just clean the floors perform with such skill and emotion. The cleaner never sought fame, but he recognized the power of the story. It reminded him and others that appearances could be deceiving, and that everyone carried unseen depths. Despite the attention, he remained humble. He still cleaned the floors, still moved quietly among the staff and guests. But now he did so with a quiet confidence. He had been seen, heard, and appreciated, not because he demanded it, but because he had let his true self shine when the moment came. The manager eventually suggested a special event, a night where the cleaner would perform in the main hall for all the guests. It would be a celebration, a way to honor his talent and share it more broadly. The cleaner agreed, though he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Years of hiding had made public performance feel daunting, even though he had proven to himself what he was capable of. The night of the performance arrived. The hall was filled with guests, many of whom had heard the story and were eager to witness the music. The lights were soft, creating an intimate atmosphere, and the piano in the corner seemed to glow under the warm illumination. The cleaner approached it quietly, carrying only his presence and his years of hidden skill. As he sat down, the room fell silent. The guests, some familiar and some new, waited with anticipation. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories of past struggles and triumphs flow through him. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost like a whisper. But as he continued, his confidence grew and the melody deepened. Each chord carried a story, each pause held emotion. The hall was filled with the kind of music that spoke to the heart, the kind that made people stop thinking and simply feel. Guests were captivated. Some leaned forward, eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. Others looked at the cleaner, seeing not a man with a mop but a musician whose life experience had shaped every note. The staff watched in awe, some unable to hide their tears. The manager stood nearby, proud and humbled by the depth of what he was witnessing. The performance lasted for nearly an hour, each piece flowing naturally into the next. The cleaner's hands moved effortlessly across the keys, guided by memory, emotion, and instinct. By the end, the entire hall was silent, holding its breath as the final note lingered in the air. And then the applause erupted. It was overwhelming, heartfelt, and lasting. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some called out words of praise, while others simply nodded, deeply moved. The cleaner remained seated, allowing the moment to wash over him. He had played not for recognition, not for applause, but for the love of music itself. Yet now he saw the impact it had on those around him. After the performance, the manager approached him once again. "You've done more than play music tonight," he said. "You've reminded all of us that talent can't be hidden forever, that everyone has something to offer, no matter their station in life." The cleaner nodded, feeling the truth of those words in his chest. It had been a long journey, filled with quiet struggle, patience, and perseverance. But now he knew that those years had not been wasted. They had prepared him for this moment, for the chance to show the world who he truly was. As the crowd began to disperse, guests came forward to offer personal thanks. Some shared their own stories of hidden talents, of dreams deferred, and struggles overcome. The cleaner listened, responding with quiet kindness, realizing that his music had opened the door for others to feel seen and understood. In the weeks and months that followed, the cleaner continued to work at the restaurant, balancing his duties with regular performances. The piano in the corner was no longer a silent witness but a partner in his life, a bridge between the past and present. Guests returned not only for the food but to experience the music, and staff treated him with a newfound respect. Through it all, the cleaner remained humble. He never forgot where he came from, never lost sight of the years when he had been overlooked and underestimated. But he also knew that he had earned his place, that his talent and dedication had created something lasting and meaningful. And in the quiet moments, when the restaurant was empty and the lights dimmed, he would sit at the piano, letting his fingers wander across the keys. He would play not for an audience, not for recognition, but for himself, for the joy of music, for the memories of a life once hidden, and for the knowledge that sometimes all it takes is one chance to change everything. The world had told him to just clean the floors, but he had shown that the human spirit could not be contained. Talent, passion, and dignity could exist anywhere, even in the most overlooked places. And in the end, it was not the applause or recognition that mattered most. It was the discovery of his own worth, the reclaiming of his dreams, and the ability to touch the lives of others through the power of music. From that night onward, The cleaner was no longer just a man with a mop and bucket. He was a musician, a storyteller, a witness to the beauty that existed when one dared to step into the light. And as he continued to play day after day, he reminded everyone who watched, listened, and believed that no one is ever truly invisible.